Are you really happy? Follow Jesus' surprising path to genuine joy with Mike Hayes. A bold prayer in the Bible ensured victory for Joshua, and Chad Caruso chose an unlikely method to cross America, and it's wheeling him into the Hall of Heroes. Coming up in episode 101 of Manly with Andy. Now joining the podcast, it's Mike Hayes. His book is called Real Happy. Mike, let's start off the conversation with this. What do you think is the biggest challenge that men face today, and how do we overcome it?
Big question, Andy, and I appreciate the question. I would have to say, without a doubt, it is the fallout that we're suffering from fatherlessness with these 60% in some communities of young people, especially young men, young ladies, of course, acted. But as it relates to men, we don't understand our role. We've never seen it. 60% of us are raised without a father in the home. So add to that challenge, a man already feels significance and a purpose. When times were much simpler, a man could leave the cave and go knock something in the head and drag it home for dinner, and he provided for his family, and his role was very clear. But now there are millions of men in a situation where their wife works and makes more than they do, and whether they work or not, it doesn't make a difference. And I'm not saying wives shouldn't work. I'm just saying that it adds to the struggle of a man finding his place of significance in his role. And so then we do a lot of stupid things, trying to find ourselves and prove that we have some reason for existence and some significance.
That's right. That's great. Let's jump into the book now. It's called Real Happy, Jesus' Surprising Path to Genuine Joy. First off, what inspired you to write this book?
A few years ago, I was in Israel, and in the north of Israel, I visited the mountain where Jesus, as one of the great teachers in history, taught his first sermon, which is called the Mount of Beatitudes, and he taught 8 principles that have been, can I use the word, manipulated through the centuries, so that now the English version reads something like this. Jesus starts off and says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." That's the translation as it sits now. So far from the meaning of what he originally said. So when you break it down and you understand Greek and even the words that he used, the term in the 15th century changed to blessed are, which sounds real holy and churchy, is actually the Greek word makarios, which means to be filled with joy. And in fact, it's really cool, Andy, because makarios was a word the Greek philosophers used to mean its happiness and joy, like it's in its ultimate form, but only the gods are really qualified to enjoy that. We commoners can't enjoy that kind of happiness. And I think, frankly, some of that slipped through to Christianity. I am a Christian, but I think a lot of that philosophy slipped through into Christianity, where so many of us, including me a few years ago, I would not have put happiness and God in the same sentence. I felt a little bit afraid of him. I felt judgmentalism from him, and I certainly didn't think he was concerned about me being happy. And then when I find out the first words that Jesus taught were totally about happiness and how to be that, it changed my life. We grow up thinking that somehow it's just an automatic, that you know how to be happy, but we have to learn everything in life. We have to learn to walk. We have to learn to speak. We have to learn to be happy. There are principles of happiness that, frankly, I wasn't taught as a young guy. And the more I got into, the more I understood. And Jesus shares 8 very distinct principles, really all of them almost, Andy, hang on the first one, but it shows you also how much we lose in translation. The first principle says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." That's the English version translated. What he actually said was, full of happiness and joy you'll be if you create a void or an empty place for spiritual things. That's the first principle of being happy, is things that are natural don't make you happy. How many stories do we have to tell about the guy that finally arrives at his first million, but he's not any happier? Or he finally gets that Ferrari, but he's not happy. Or he gets that beautiful girl and he's still happy. because physical things don't have the ability to make us long-term happy. Happiness comes by creating an empty spot that sometimes we've filled with everything in the world, from houses to cars to relationships. And in fact, it's a spiritual concept. Happiness is an inside job.
Wow, there's so much we could go on that. As you're just saying that, I'm just thinking about all the junk in my house and the junk in my life that clutters it up and takes up space.
The brilliant thinker Jordan Peterson, that you may have heard of, he says that in teaching young college-age students, show me your bedroom and your closet, and I'll show you everything about your life. Because there is a physical connection between the order in our lives and the condition of our heart and our spirit. The more consumed and absorbed we are, the more chaos there tends to be in our lives. And we're always running around with our hair on fire, trying to find out what's the next high that's going to make me happy. And our life is a mess. I actually teach people, Andy, that, believe it or not, you can get a real lift in your spirit by doing something physical. Like for a man, go out and clean out and organize your garage and get it looking really good, like a NASCAR mechanic could walk in there and you could eat off the floor. Organize your garage and you will feel better. What we do is we cram that thing full, and then we go and rent a storage warehouse and we start filling it with junk. My contention is there, Andy, if you got stuff in a storage building that you haven't seen in 3 years, you probably don't really need it. And all of us would get a real kick out of, especially at this time of Christmas, give something away. Go in your closet and take half your clothes that you're not going to wear anyway, and go to a shelter somewhere and give them. And your closet will be more organized and your heart will feel really warm. We have to learn to do things physically that impact us in our soul, in our thinking, in our spirit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's good. Man, that speaks to me. I love that. The chapter that also spoke to me a lot was talking about happy are those who mourn. And this line just wrecked me when I read it, just to be honest, Mike, because I lost my mom this spring. And you wrote, "We are born crying and we die crying, and in between is a continual brook of sadness."
Andy, and I'm sorry for your loss with your mom. I know what that feels like, and yours is much fresher than mine. There is a concept, and we share it in the book, that, in one place, Andy, and it's almost like reading between the lines, but there's a scripture in the Gospels that says, in the meantime, Jesus sat them down and taught them there. And when I looked at that, I thought, really, most of our life is lived in the meantime. We have some really high points. We have, just to name a few, graduating from high school was probably bigger a high point than even college graduations for me. Your first baby, your marriage, your first baby, there are some high points in our lives, but a lot of our lives are lived in the struggle of just the meantime, just the day to day. And the process of mourning or grief is so natural to life. There's no way to escape it. So evidently there must be some way to deal with it. Now, since I learned what we've written in this book, and it wasn't for me as well, I lost my sister just about 3 months ago or so, a few months ago, to pancreatic cancer. She's a younger sister than me. Took her out way quick and way too soon. But I can honestly tell you, Andy, that with the truths of the understanding and training myself in the concept of this book, it wasn't that I wasn't sad. It wasn't that it didn't bring tears. But the mourning process did not take me to the dark places that mourning has taken me before. Because the promise is you can be happy even in your mourning. It's a buoyant, it's a foundation. There's a deep settled happiness that has entered your life that doesn't, I'll say it this way. For me, it doesn't allow my lows to go as low, but it takes the ceiling off of my higher points. I can enjoy and be happier with my life, with my relationships, with my successes, and foundation of real happiness doesn't allow me to dip as low. It's just not there.
I love what you said. We're talking about happy as are the merciful too. You talk about the problem with mercy, and I thought that was a cool way to think about it too.
Yeah, one of the maybe difficult sayings that Jesus ever shared was that he equivocated the unwillingness to forgive with being able to receive forgiveness for yourself. And I heard it said one time that we want to judge everybody else by their actions, but we want to be judged by our motives. You didn't
Mm.
understand why I did that. No, I'm sorry. I don't have the right to judge you for what you did, but go easy on myself because I understand that my intention wasn't really to hurt you or ruin your life. And I don't know what you're upset about. So mercy is absolutely equated with what you give, you receive. And those who find ways to show mercy actually reap more mercy. And look, I don't know about you, Andy, but I need a lot. I need a lot of mercy. I have to have forgiveness. I'm like, I said something the other day. Kathy, my wife, is my best friend of 52 years. But I had to say, what did I raise my voice like that and yell for? That was totally out of line.
Hmm.
And if I can't ask forgiveness, and my contention is, Andy, we make it way too big a deal to to be merciful
Hmm.
and to offer forgiveness. I like to call it it's a real maturity check. How long does it take you between being wronged and you choosing to forgive it in order to forgive? When somebody does you wrong, does it take you 5 minutes or does it take you 5 years?
Hmm.
There are people who I've counseled people, Andy, who are still holding things against their parents who've been gone for years.
Hmm.
So it's like, when are you going to give that up? You are handcuffing your own opportunity for joy by what we do is we think that by withholding mercy, somehow it's going to make them straighten up. And the truth is, there are people that did you wrong. They either don't know it or don't care, and they may never make that right. If you're going to wait to extend mercy until they decide to ask your forgiveness, you may wait a long time. So, mercy is a scales. And what balances the scale is don't expect it if you haven't given any. So, all of us, in my opinion, all of us need to exercise. I try to do simple acts of mercy every day. I guess you could call it a good deed. The world we live in now, like I told you, we were on the road. Yesterday, Kathy and I were pulling out of a parking place and we saw a gentleman washing windows and he just seemed like a nice guy and he was really working hard. And I said, we need to get his number. We got windows we could use washed. So I called him over to the car to get his number. And there was a lady behind us that had plenty of room to get out around me. And she saw obviously what I was doing and just absolutely laid on the horn and blared her horn for 30 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what is the problem with, I wasn't holding her up. I didn't know what the point was that she had to make. And so I wanted to, so we finished our conversation and she was still honking on her horn. So I got out of the car and walked back there to say, I'm so sorry. I didn't. And she rolled down her window and looked at me with the nastiest look I've ever seen and said, get out of my way. And I said, I'm so sorry. Look, that could have turned into something where it was really a big deal and I couldn't get over it. But when I tell you about it today, the reason I'm telling you is life happens to all of us. And there are little things and big things that are going to give you the opportunity to forgive and show mercy every day. And when we quit doing, that's why one of the apostles wrote, don't let the sun go down on your wrath.
Hmm.
And I think even scientists have proven that if you sleep on it and you hold on to it overnight, the next day it has become a part of your psyche.
Hmm.
And now it's going to be more difficult to deal with than it would have been when it was fresh.
Hmm.
Yeah, mercy is a huge component. Showing mercy is a huge part of enjoying happiness.
Another thing that you say in the book is when Jesus says, "Happy are the peacemakers," you point out the difference, and I hadn't thought about this before, the difference between peacemakers and peacekeepers.
I actually have, in a conversation with Kathy, my wife, who's very smart, but I have her to thank for that idea because we were talking about this. And she said to me one day, Mike, a policeman, even the best of them, they're not hired to be peacemakers. They're peacekeepers. They stand on the corner or they write you a ticket for running a red light because they don't want you to have an accident. So they are conscripted with keeping the peace. That's what soldiers do. Soldiers in the field are there to keep peace. UN troops we even call peacekeepers, but they're not peacemakers. Sort out the issues. Peacemakers come up with solutions. Peacemakers have suggestions of how we could do things differently. We need a nation full of that. In politics, we need peacemakers. We need it in the classroom. We need it in the pulpit. We need people everywhere that will tap into the creative genius and juices of making peace. And that's where happiness comes from. A parent has the physical might or even the authority to shut their child in a room because they've sassed or whatever and keep peace for the moment. But long term, that doesn't make peace. You might have fixed it for the moment, but you're going to have some conversations, some wisdom, some creativity. That doesn't happen again because I'm not against discipline. Choose your own way within bounds, but that doesn't make peace. It may keep peace for the moment. Like they're acting up at the table, go to your room. That may quiet things at the table, but that doesn't fix the problem that caused it in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think, and I often think the difference between their keeping and making peace is we're just trying to keep the peace. We just want everyone to be happy. We want everyone to get along.
Yeah.
And there is conflict, and good things can come from that. And I think so often people, especially in this culture now, it says, well, I want you to live your truth. I don't want to upset what you're doing. You live your way, I'll live my way. But that doesn't help us that doesn't make peace, though.
No, one of the biggest, and I don't say this to be controversial, and I honor the effort, but when I was a young guy, there was the birthing of what came to be known as the National Council of Churches. And it's a worldwide organization. And the idea was, let's just all get along. But in the charter, it was like, it doesn't matter what your doctrines are or what you believe. We're all friends and we just need to get along. Bury your differences. But that was an experiment that went nowhere, spent a lot of money and a lot of effort and probably well-meaning people. But real unity, it can't be built on just the desire to have unity. It has to be built on shared values and shared desires and a commitment to truth. So you can't just say, let's all get along. And it doesn't matter what you think or what you believe or how you act. We're all committed to a bond of unity. It doesn't work that way. It has to be, commonality comes about with conversation and understanding and a lot of mercy and wisdom. And that's how we make peace. I went recently, Andy, to a few years ago, actually, to northern Iraq and met with the leaders of the Kurdish people who are attempting to get their own homeland. And they were the ones left out when the PICO agreement formed what is now Iraq out of Arabs and Persians and Turks and just threw them all together and drew boundaries. It's never worked in Iraq, and it never will, because the Kurds, who were the most ancient there, along with Persians, got left out totally. And the Persians and the Arabs are not even the same language or culture. You can't force them together. They're a different ancient culture. And the Turks have a whole different country. But the Medes, they're called in the Old Testament, the Medes and the Persians, now they're called the Kurds. They're the left out people. So I went there to talk with them on a peacemaking and ran it up the flagpole when I came back at the White House with then President Trump that I was working with as a faith advisor. And so it's work. That's the point I'm making, Andy, is that was a hard trip. It was a dangerous trip. We flew into Erbil in northern Iraq, and we had to be ushered around everywhere with Peshmerga special forces, and there were enemy troops everywhere, and there were militias, and it was dangerous. The day after we left, 3 of the guys escorting us got in a firefight and were shot. Peacemaking is not easy. Peacekeeping is just put enough people with guns there and we'll stop this. But peacemaking has to go much deeper. And those are the people that are happiest. Not saying we're the 800-pound gorilla and we can make you do the right thing. But in fact, we want to know you, we want to understand you, and we want to show mercy one to another. And those are the people that will be happiest and live the longest, frankly.
One more question for you. In the chapter Mary Martyr, you start with a powerful quote from G.K. Chesterton. Jesus promised to his disciples 3 things: that they would be completely fearless, absurdly happy, and in constant trouble. So how do we embrace that happy suffering?
You know, I say, and I told the story, I think, in that chapter under that concept, Andy, a few years ago. I had a strange desire to go to Vietnam. I was raised in the 60s. That was my 60s and early 70s was my generation. A lot of my friends went to Vietnam in that war, and I didn't go. I was in college, but I had a connection with it. I knew boys that died there. I knew boys wounded there. So a few years ago, I had an invitation to speak at a conference there of Christian pastors. I went there to Ho Chi Minh City. I met with them, and out of their 12 leaders of basically at that time the underground church, I heard their stories, and I counted up among 12 of them 22 years that they had collectively spent in prisons in the worst of conditions just for being Christians. Now, I was so humbled by that, and I was stricken by, and the reason I put it in the book, Andy, I was so convicted by, they were telling me their story over lunch. When we sat down to lunch, they said, start teaching us or whatever. And I said, no, let me meet you guys. Let me hear your story. So with a translator, by the time they made their way around the table, I think I'd cried my eyes out because I had never heard such stories of suffering, but never seen so much joy. These guys were jostling each other, elbowing one another, laughing about things. One of them said, you brought a scripture to me. I accepted Christ and Christianity. You told me preach this same scripture on the street corner. And 3 days later, I got arrested. So you got me in trouble. And they had so much joy that I realized that was a level I'd never reached. My joy was so contingent on how my day was going. And I was so small in that. So the truth is, Andy, we're going to suffer things because we're in a broken world. And if we can't get past that and have joy, we'll never have joy. So even in our suffering, there is a promise from God that you can be unbelievably happy even when you suffer. And the real kind of suffering, Andy, is when you suffer for having done the right thing. That's what that chapter touches on. Because some people call it persecution, and it's really punishment for their wrong they're going through. It's not persecution. They deserve what they're getting. But it's persecution when you suffer for doing the right thing. And Jesus said, I'm going to promise you there's a kind of joy that you will tap into when you suffer for doing the right thing. And as we close, Andy, I'm going to equate that to some of my heroes. My wife's mother, my mother-in-law, was a single mom that raised 5 kids successfully by herself. And one of the great tragedies, but one of the great heroic acts in America is all the single parents raising good kids. And they are suffering for not doing the wrong thing. It wasn't them that left. It wasn't them that had the affair. It wasn't them that chose to lose their spouse to the war or to some other tragedy or disease. But they're doing the right thing. Even though they suffer, there's a special joy coming to them for that.
Now taking a look in the Bible, in Joshua 10, starting in verse 1, Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had captured and completely destroyed Ai and killed its king, just as he had destroyed the town of Jericho and killed its king. He also learned that the Gibeonites had made peace with Israel and now were their allies. He and his people became very afraid when they heard all this because Gibeon was a large town, as large as the royal cities and larger than Ai, and the Gibeonite men were strong warriors. So King Adonizedek of Jerusalem sent messengers to several other kings, Hoham of Hebron, Piram of Jarmuth, Japhia of Lachish, and Debir of Eglon. "Come and help me destroy Gibeon," he urged them, "for they have made peace with Joshua and the people of Israel." So these 5 Amorite kings combined their armies for a united attack. They moved all their troops into place and attacked Gibeon. The men of Gibeon quickly sent messengers to Joshua at his camp in Gilgal. "Don't abandon your servants now," they pleaded. "Come at once, save us, help us, for all the Amorite kings who live in the hill country have joined forces to attack us." So Joshua and his entire army, including his best warriors, left Gilgal and set out for Gibeon. "Do not be afraid of them," the Lord said to Joshua, "for I have given you victory over them. Not a single one of them will be able to stand up to you." Joshua traveled all night from Gilgal and took the Amorite armies by surprise. The Lord threw them into a panic, and the Israelites slaughtered great numbers of them at Gibeon. Then the Israelites chased the enemy along the road to Beth-horon, killing them all the way to Azekah and Makkedah. As the Amorites retreated down the road from Beth-horon, the Lord destroyed them with a terrible hailstorm from heaven that continued until they reached Azekah. The hail killed more of the enemy than the Israelites killed with the sword. On the day the Lord gave the Israelites victory over the Amorites, Joshua prayed to the Lord in front of all the people of Israel. He said, "Let the sun stand still over Gibeon, and the moon over the valley of Ajalon." So the sun stood still, and the moon stayed in place until the nation of Israel had defeated its enemies. So 2 big takeaways here. First off, you're seeing the Gibeonites being attacked. Now remember, just in the previous chapter, in the previous episode, we talked about how the Gibeonites juked the Israelites into forming an alliance with them. They lied to them. And so this is where you see Joshua being a man of his word. Because you think about it, all these mighty armies were coming up against Gibeon. They could have just said, "Hey, I guess we're out of this treaty. We don't have to protect them, do we? We could just let them go and it would be over." No, they chose to do the hard thing because they kept their word. And as they went to attack an army, actually 5 armies, 5 different countries that were stronger than them, God promised victory. So Joshua leads the charge. Things are going great. The Amorites are in a panic, and God is even chucking hailstones at them like divine artillery, killing more of them than Joshua and his men did. But then Joshua looks at the sun. He knows there's still work to be done, and if the night falls, the enemy might slip away. So there, right in front of everyone, he asks God the most audacious prayer in the Bible to stop time, literally. Joshua prays, "Let the sun stand still over Gibeon and the moon over the valley of Ajalon." And it happens. The sun doesn't set until the battle is over. So that's a prayer that it's so bold, so audacious. I don't know if I would dare even think it, let alone say it out loud. But Joshua wasn't focused on how impossible it seemed. He was focused on what God could do. And how many times do we hold back because we think we're asking for too much? Next time you have that feeling, just think about Joshua. There's no such thing as asking too much of God. If you're in the middle of a battle, whether it's at work, at home, or in your own heart, don't be afraid to pray big, bold, sun-stopping prayers. Now entering the Hall of Heroes, Chad Caruso. Armed with nothing but a skateboard, a backpack, and a single set of clothes, Chad embarked on a journey from Venice Beach, California, to Virginia Beach, Virginia. Over 57 grueling days, he skated 3,162 miles through blistering heat, pounding rain, and unyielding headwinds, all to claim the Guinness World Record for the fastest coast-to-coast trip on a skateboard. But this journey wasn't just about breaking records. It was about breaking chains. 9 years sober, Chad used his epic trek to raise awareness for addiction and mental health, hoping his story would inspire others to seek hope and healing. And as Chad reached the finish line and saw the Atlantic, he didn't cling to the board that carried him thousands of miles. Instead, he hurled it triumphantly into the ocean, signaling the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. And his determination resonated so deeply with the people of Virginia Beach that the mayor declared May 19th to be Chad Caruso Day, a testament to his perseverance and purpose. So because Chad Caruso proved that grit can conquer any distance and used his record-breaking feat to champion sobriety and mental health, he is officially in the Manly with Andy Hall of Heroes. Conor Gallagher, CEO and dad of 15, shares his system for restoring peace and joy at home in well-ordered family. Looking at the Bible, we'll see the danger of hiding instead of fighting, and Rudiger Koch is diving into the deep end of human endurance and science, and his underwater journey is surfacing him into the Hall of Heroes. Coming up next time on Manly with Andy.
Manly with Andy is a Wow God production. Discover more at wowgod.com.